the goal of the webinar, discuss overall what we're going to be doing on the webinar, and talk about what we're not going to be doing. So today is specifically to provide information for renewal COC project applicants. So if you have never applied for a COC program or you're not completing a renewal, this is not for you, this webinar, and I will not feel insulted if you hang up. This webinar is specifically for those who are creating and completing a renewal application. And what we're going to do is detail changes and updates to eSnaps and the application itself. And I do have to tell you, this year there are a lot. So I am going to kind of fly through them and encourage folks to reach out to CARE staff with more specific information. However, with that said, if you do have a question while I'm going through something, please feel free to chime in and ask it. I don't want you to forget your train of thought, and I want this to be useful for everyone. We're going to go over the application format and just review very quickly the different parts of the application. We are focusing on permanent supportive housing, and I'll explain why I'm pointing that out as we continue. And then we're going to detail the actual technical submission directions. So we are not logging into eSnaps today because that would take forever just to go from one screen to another. But what I did do was do some screenshots so that we could actually look at the technical submission of it. This webinar will not go over what a continuum of care is, nor is it going to go over an overview of the NOFA. CARES did provide a NOFA overview webinar, which is on our website. It was recorded. So if you want information about the 2017 priorities that HUD is setting, feel free to go to our website and look at that. Okay, so again, this call and webinar is really for folks who have already used eSnaps and who are renewing an application. So welcome back to eSnaps. I'm sure this is everyone's favorite time of the year. And before we even get started, just a reminder that you have to know your username and password. If you forget your password, it's really easy to click the forgot your password. Just a note, CARES staff has no control over the eSnaps area. So if you get logged out for some reason or locked out, you have to go through HUD AAQ. You can't go through CARE staff because we don't do much with it. So 2017 application and process changes. Again, there are a lot of them. The HUD forms that used to be required and were part of your applicant profile are now electronic, which is amazing, because what that means is that you're not going to have to run around and get your executive director to sign things 15 times. And you're not going to get a terms and condition or a C19 because something is dated wrong. eSnaps now automatically dates the forms, and it also pre-populates a lot of them, and I'm going to quickly go through it. So that's amazing. Second change, you don't need a grant number anymore, the full grant number, which used to cause a lot of stress for folks because the end of your grant number changes every year. Now HUD is calling it a PIN number, and what that is just the first 6 digits of your grant, which will never change. That's always the same. So that automatically populates, which is great. Third change, which is a big one, and I'm going to go into it. HUD has created a new designation for permanent supportive housing projects, and it's called Dedicated Plus. We're going to go into that, so I'm going to skip over it for a moment. Another new function, which is great, you can submit your application without changes. This is golden because the majority of your application really doesn't change year to year. And if it does, HUD allows you to now just note which screen you need to change what needs to be changed, note to HUD what you had to update, and you move on. So the process of actually completing your application is a lot more simple than it ever has been. And I could say that with confidence because I've already done it with a few applications. So I think it is a good change. However, the caveat is there are some new questions. So there are some areas that HUD forces you to go in and answer, and I'm going to show you that when we do the actual technical overview. HUD is now allowing expansion projects to be applied for using reallocated or bonus funding, excluding any transitional housing. So if you have a permanent supportive housing project that you're hoping to go in for a bonus to expand, in the past, HUD used to make you create the 2 applications when you were applying this first year, and then continue to have 2 applications like they were 2 separate projects for ongoing. Now HUD is allowing you, when you apply for that bonus, they ask you if this is an expansion project. If it is, you click yes. They ask you what PIN number from the other project is it expanding. You pop that in, you fill out your application, and going forward, if you are accepted, if that project is accepted, you're only renewing for the one that you expanded, which is awesome. So the consolidation happens on the back end, and HUD takes care of that, which means only 1 APR, not 2, only 1 contract for you to sign, not 2, only 1 locks drawdown. So I think that's
Cheryl Schenkel-O'Neill.
Hi, Cheryl. So I think the expansion projects, the ability to apply for an expansion project is great. Another really great thing, there was a change in the budget information. So in the past, where you had to put a narrative, a detailed description and quantity or quality of what you were doing for that money, HUD has taken that away. So now if you're applying for support services and it's $24,000, instead of having to say $24,000, 0.2 FTE of this person, 0.5 FTE of that person, you don't do that anymore. However, the caveat is that you should be doing that on the back end, right? So when HUD comes to monitor you, you should be able to have all that information, but they're no longer requiring that you put that in your application, because honestly, this is what a lot of folks had to redo in order to get their contracts, because there were constantly either mistakes or issues with the calculations. So that is huge. Match policy. There is a match policy update, which we were all waiting for. So program income may be counted. And I will explain what program income is. This is huge because we were counting it for a long time, and then HUD said no, and now they're clearly saying yes. And they've actually added questions in order to get more information about the income that comes into your project. The last piece, which we've been doing, but now HUD is going to be more tight on looking at, is the in-kind MOU attachments. So if your match is in-kind, you have to have an MOU, and the MOU has to meet the regulations. So we'll go through that, but that's definitely something we are only going to touch on today. And if you need more information about that, or you need an example of what an MOU, an in-kind MOU looks like, let us know, and we'll work with you separately. Okay, so let's talk about a dedicated plus project and what that means. So when we were at the conference in DC a couple of weeks ago, there were a lot of questions about Dedicated Plus. This is a new designation that HUD only threw at communities on July 14th when the NOFA came out. We had no idea that this is where they were going. And what I like to say is this is icing on the cake. So before I define what it is, I just want to talk about the levels, right? So you have dedicated chronic beds, right? And you could have programs that are 100% dedicated. So what I want to clarify here is what HUD is talking about when they say Dedicated Plus project is your whole project. They're not talking about individual beds within your project. And so I want to go back, and when I talk about chronic, some of you have dedicated chronic beds within projects, but your project is not 100% dedicated, right? So what HUD is looking at now is your full project. So there are projects that are 100% dedicated, and HUD loves that. That's the goal, right? You dedicate your beds to chronic and your whole project to chronic. This is like icing on the cake, Dedicated Plus. Dedicated Plus is a step below, in my mind. What it does is open up your criteria to any of these 6 bullets that are here. Is it 6? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. So it has to be, if you decide to take the Dedicated Plus project designation, you have to have all of your beds dedicated to serve folks at intake who meet the following criteria. And it's an or. So they could be experiencing chronic homelessness, that's fine. Or they could be residing in transitional housing project. Here's the caveat, there are 2. The transitional housing project that will be eliminated, right, during this past competition. And they have to meet the chronic homeless definition when they went into that transitional housing. So just for everybody on the phone, we don't have any transitional projects that were lost last year and that are closing. So we don't have anyone who would fall into that category. So I'm going to step to the next one, the third one. Anyone who's residing in transitional housing funded by, and we're going to talk about this new project, a joint PH-RRH component project, and who was experiencing chronic homelessness when they entered. So the caveat there is, at this point in time, we don't have any joint projects, right? We may have some next year. There may be folks who would be applying for a joint project for the bonus or the reallocation. But at this point, we don't have anyone in any of our continuums who would meet that definition. The third is someone who has been homeless, so, living on the street, living in a place not meant for human habitation, or in a shelter for 12 months within the past 3 years, but it's not the 4 separate occasions that are required to be chronic. You can take folks who are a level below. That's kind of what HUD was saying during the conference. And then the last one is opening it up to those who were in a VA program and met one of the above criteria. So again, they had to be in a VA program and they had to be chronic when they had come into that VA program. So again, what HUD is talking about are not dedicating beds to this. They're talking about dedicating your whole project. And that's important because I'm going to talk about when you fill out your application, you have to note that. If you want more information about this, because again, this is new, so we're all learning. One, there are some AAQs on HUD's website, and I have a link to some of them, but it's also in the NOFA on page 18. So all projects are going to be asked to confirm whether their project is 100% dedicated or dedicated plus. So there are kind of two levels here, right? So you have some projects who they're currently not 100% dedicated, right? So if your project is currently not required by contract to be 100% dedicated, your choices are NA, so you could choose neither, right? You're not going to become dedicated plus, and you're not going to change your program to be dedicated 100% chronic. If your project is currently 100% dedicated, your choice is to use the dedicated plus designation, or just keep it 100% designated. Now, here's where it gets confusing, right? So if you're right now 100% dedicated to chronic, you can dedicate plus, but then you can dedicate beds just to chronic. And you do that on screen 4B. So again, if you're 100% dedicated now, HUD is saying we're allowing you to change, or we're allowing you to keep what you want. But even if you change it, you can still have that higher level of designation. And for example, if I have a 10-bed project, I can turn to dedicated plus, but then dedicate 5 of those beds just to chronic. Okay. So let's talk for a minute about the new joint TH and PH-RRH programs. So this is a new type of program that HUD is allowing, and they did put out a really good 2-page explanation of what it is, which really, just to summarize it, it's a program that allows you to have the budget lines of a transitional housing program with the budget lines of a rapid rehousing program. So it is one, and it is new. So if you currently have a transitional housing program and you're thinking, wow, wouldn't it be great to not only be able to pay for my operations of my transitional housing program, but also to offer wraparound services and rental stipend for a short period of time when someone goes out into the community? This could be for you. The issue is you would need to reallocate your money because you can't just add a rapid rehousing component to it. So you can't apply for reallocated money or bonus money for a rapid rehousing program and then next year ask HUD to combine your current transitional housing and your new rapid rehousing program if you were awarded. So HUD also clearly identifies where they think the joint programs would be most appropriate. So we did link the paper to the end of this presentation, and if people are interested in either applying, using the additional dollars that could be available in your community, or if they're thinking of reallocating their own dollars, please read through it first to make sure that you're very clear on the expectation. Okay, are there any questions before I move on to the actual application and the application breakdown? Okay, great. So I did get a comment that noted that Dedicated Plus does not apply to prior awarded bonus projects that are serving 100% dedicated chronic. And I would need to get back to you on that because my understanding is that HUD is actually opening it up for everybody. and that they're not holding what was required previously. Now, the caveat to that, though, is if you are 100% dedicated and you decide that you're not going to be dedicated anymore and that you only want to be dedicated plus, that affects your continuum. So these two designations, I think it's important when your agency is deciding if you want to designate. Both of these designations affect your COC overall scoring. So HUD wants to see chronic number one, right? Like that's what they want. Dedicated chronic that's platinum. This dedicated plus is gold, right? They want to see that you have services that help the most vulnerable, and then that you have services that help people that are right below it, which is what they talked about a lot during the question and answer session in DC, was that there are folks who are really very vulnerable, but they're just missing that chronic status, or they lose their chronic status because they're bouncing from one permanent supportive housing program to another, to a transitional, to on the street again, and you just can't figure all that out. HUD is saying we want to have this kind of safety net, and their safety net for those folks is what Dedicated Plus is. So I will definitely send out info sheet to clarify more about the Dedicated Plus for folks. So thank you for your question. Okay, the application breakdown. So the breakdown doesn't look different than it has in the past. So you have 8 parts of the application. Parts 1 and 2 have increased a little bit because now the HUD forms that used to be within your applicant profile are now pulled into your application, but the parts are still the same. So parts 1 and 2 are the HUD forms and certifications, and then if you have any subrecipient and recipient information that you're required to populate. The majority of that is already pre-populated, so that's easy. Parts 3 to 6 are the project specific, and these are always different if you're depending on what your project type is. So again, the project type that we're going to be focusing on. So I'm hearing some static. If folks could put us on mute, that would be great. Thank you. So we're focusing on permanent housing because that's the majority of the applications that we receive. If you have transitional housing or support service only, it does look very similar, but the majority of the information that we're covering today is general, and this will help you anyway. Part 7 are the attachments and the certification, and then part 8 is the submission summary. So submission without changes, this is what I said was amazing and helps make the application submission process so much easier, because you usually don't change any information within these areas anyway. So this year, project applicants can submit parts 2 to 6 without changes. So that basic organizational information, the number of units that you are contracting, your demographic information, all of that you could review and then don't touch. Now, if you choose that, HUD fast tracks their review of your project. So there is definitely a plus to not changing anything that doesn't need to be changed. There are caveats where you do have to change. So you cannot use submission without changes if you have consolidated. You cannot use submission without changes if you have a budget amendment. You just can't do it. So if you have to make changes, the second bullet kind of clearly identifies. All you have to do is tell HUD exactly which screens you need to make changes on. Then you note what changes you made. So this also helps quicken the process on their end of application review, because they quickly just look at what you said you changed, go back, double check that it's appropriate changes, and quickly move on. They're not actually reviewing everything all over again. So please make sure if you are making changes, you don't have to give them a full-out narrative of what you changed, bullet it. And they say that within the detailed instructions. Just quick. On screen 4B, I added 10 to the demographic information for chronically homeless. Quick, down and dirty, just quick for them to be able to move on. So eSnaps is not able to unselect things. So if you thought that you needed to make a change on a page and you clicked it, you said submissions with changes and you click it, you can't unclick it once you save it. So if you do that by error, again, in the box where it's asking you to explain your changes, just put an error was made, no changes made. And again, it just pushes the process of their review quickly through. So parts 3 to 6, and again, we're focusing on permanent housing, are broken down into project information, and this is where the dedicated plus comes in. And then I put in here, even though it's not in part 3, it's actually in part 6, there's a new question about the match. So we'll get to it. Part 4 is housing and services. Part 5, talk about your participants and the outreach that your project does. And then part 6 is your budget. So are there any questions with the 8-part application before I quickly go through some of the screenshots of eSnaps? Okay, great. So I'm gonna step all the way back and talk about how to create all the way to how to submit. And I'm gonna fly through this quickly, but again, if you need a tutorial, you have the 2 options. One is always feel free to give us a call and we'll walk you through it. Any CARE staff will be able to help you with that on the COC side. Or you could just listen to this part of the recording again and keep pausing me while you're going through. So the biggest issue that folks find in using eSnaps is that if they skip a process, they can't move on, right? So there are 4 processes within eSnaps, and your left-hand toolbar follows those processes. So first you have to update your applicant profile. Then you need to register for the funding. Then you create your project. And then you have to go into the submission area in order to complete the application and submit it. You have to do these in order. The only thing you can do and keep going back to is your applicant profile. So your applicant profile needs a lot of information, right? It needs information on your code of conduct, which is required for folks to put in. So don't let it fool you when it says, no, it's not required, because if you don't put it in, especially this year when there were some regulation changes on code of conduct, you will not be getting your contract until you submit it. So please make sure that you go through your applicant profile and attach anything that's needed. However, you can move on. So if you go through your applicant profile and you're waiting on someone to get you the latest and greatest copy of your organization's code of conduct, you can close your applicant profile and do all of the other things, and then reopen your applicant profile in order to attach documents. And I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so again, we have the login information. This is your welcome screen. You log in. Rules of behavior, that was new last year. You have to accept it. If you decline, they'll kick you out. And then what you want to do is go to the left side, the left-hand toolbar, which everything within eSnaps is on your left-hand side. It is not on the top. And you click Applicant. So some of you will only have one applicant and you're not going to see a drop-down. So if you look at the screen, we have a drop-down, but that's because we have multiple applicants who we work with. So if you have multiple applicants like we do, you have to make sure you choose the right one. And this is the screen you'll see. So what you want to do is open the folder, and you'll be then taken to the screen, the very first screen of the applicant profile. The issue here is that you'll see it says this e-form has been marked as complete. So you have to open it for editing first. In order to open it, you have to go to page 6, which is Submission Summary. You'll see the Edit button is able to be clicked. You click it. It'll turn, well, first it'll go away and it'll turn to the word complete, and it'll be grayed out at first. The reason why it's grayed out is because you have this big red X here, and everybody will have that X when you first go in. Because this is the first year that HUD put the 2880 form within the actual eSnaps electronic system. In the past, we had to fill it out on paper, get our executive director to sign it, and then if we had multiple projects, we would have to keep scanning it in and scanning it in. So I could tell you for CARES, we had like 20 of these that if we had one wrong, we would have to go back and rescan and re-upload. The nice thing here is that in your applicant profile, you're only confirming certain sections, and then every time you create a project, you fill out information for your 2880, and when you fully submit to HUD, it aggregates all that information and pre-populates it for you. So the nice thing is you'll never have a wrong grant number, you will never have a wrong project name, and you will never have a wrong budget amount, because now it does it all for you. So this right here is amazing. So in order to start actually working on it, you need to go back to your first screen and just click through and make sure that everything is correct within all of the pages. So you are a project applicant. Don't choose anything else. So you are a project applicant. Okay. So I just skipped here to the new form. And this is what the 2880 looks like, right? And again, this all pre-populated for me. I didn't have to do anything because it took all of the information from area 3 and it popped it here. So the only thing, and I'm sorry that it didn't, let me go back. So there is one question you have to answer here, which the screen didn't capture. It asks if your agency is getting more than $200,000 from HUD. So the answer for some of us is no. And if the answer is no, that's great. You really don't have to do anything else. If the answer is yes, and I want to be very clear, they're not just asking if you're getting $200,000 for one project. If you have multiple projects and it equals $500,000, you have to answer yes. And I'm going to go through it because I pulled some additional documentation that we'll talk about in a minute to fill out parts 2 and 3. So with your applicant profile, once you complete it, so once this little red X turns to a green check, you have to remember to hit complete. It's not going to yell at you if you don't. What will happen is you won't be able to register for a funding opportunity or create a project. So if you start getting warnings as you are moving on and it's not letting you do it, it's probably because you forgot to click complete. So when it's only complete when you click complete. Okay. So the next step after you update your applicant profile and you complete it is to register for the funding opportunity. So I'm using the example of the Albany Housing Authority, who is just renewing, right? They don't have a new project application. They're not applying for planning funds or UFA costs. So I would go and find which one I needed, renewal, and I click the little white page with the check mark. It'll spin and think and think and think, and then it will tell you that you've been registered and you have to just click the back button. Okay. So again, if you have a project that you're renewing, but then you're also going in for a bonus or you're reallocating, you have to go back into projects because you're not going to submit a renewal project application for a new project. So you would click projects again and go through that process one more time, but this time with a new project application, FY17. So yeah, just to mention, they have FY16 in here for everything still too. So just be careful that you're clicking on the right one. Okay. So once you registered for the funding opportunity and you're sure you registered for the right one, you then go back to your left-hand side and you click projects. When you click projects, you'll see a whole bunch of stuff come up, especially if you've been within the COC world for a while. What you need to do is go to funding opportunity name and go to whatever you want. So renewal project application FY 2017 is what I want. So I use my drop down and I clicked on it. It's going to be blank because there is no project that has been created yet. So this is what you want to see. I know a lot of folks call when they get to this process and they get very nervous. It should be blank because there isn't anything. But you do want to start to create your project. And for agencies that have multiple renewal projects, you keep doing it here, right? So in order to create a project, you click on the little piece of paper with the plus sign. And this screen will pop up. And it would be blank, so the project applicant name is going to be blank and import data from is going to be blank, right? So the example here is I'm creating the Albany Damien Center program 2017, right? I'm pulling information from last year, right? The Albany Damien Center program 2016, and it's giving me the grant number, right? So that I could double check that I'm actually importing the correct information. I could do three things. I could just save it and it's just going to keep the screen. I can save and add another. So for example, with the Albany Housing Authority, I have 8 other projects that I need to create and import the data from last year. So I'm going to keep hitting that one. But once I'm done and I'm finished with my 8, I want to click Save and Back. Once you click Save and Back, and I didn't take a screenshot of it, but I'm going to go back for you. You should click Projects again, and now you're going to have a bunch of projects. For example, my Albany Housing Authority has 8 projects that are completed here. This is not where I go in to complete my application, though. Right? This is only where I create it. So if I want to complete my application, I have to go to submissions. So submissions is the last place you go, and that's where you actually get into your application. So in order to find your application, and again, for those of you who have tons of of different applications in there, you have to really screen it, right? So to filter it, find the project applicant name, and I do suggest that you put in parentheses the fiscal year, because it makes it so much easier to find everything if we're really clear, because people keep naming their projects the same thing. So this will help you designate what data to import from, and it also will help you if you have any terms and conditions, it will come through with that same name. So we filtered, we found it here, and you'll see that there's a little orange folder, and you would click into there, and your part 1 of the application will appear. So again, when you first click in, you're not seeing all 8 parts of your application, because a lot of what you're entering in part 1 links to what screens need to be seen in the following parts, right? In parts 3 to 6. So a lot of this doesn't look any different than last year. You have your SF for 24, which is the beginning information within the project. The only difference here, 5B, your federal award identifier, it is no longer your full grant number. Again, it's only your PIN, which is great. You do have to check to confirm that that PIN is correct, because that PIN automatically appears because you already just imported information. So if that PIN is different, I would pause, take a step, and make sure that you actually imported the correct year and the correct project. You do have to do the certifying information on the next page, the next few pages. And then here's the 2880. So remember, I paused, right, from the 2880 portion that's in your applicant profile is also here, right? So in your applicant profile, you actually don't enter a lot of information. You will enter some of it here and confirm it. So what you're confirming are parts 2 and 3. And so I did copy and paste, because this is important to understand what they're asking of you in parts 2 and 3. So in part 2, they're asking if you're getting other government assistance and the expected sources and uses of that funding over a certain financial threshold. Part 3 connects to that and follows up, I should say, and asks if there are any interested parties. So I have to tell you, for the majority of our folks, even if you're getting more than $200,000 in HUD assistance, you're not getting over the cap of other government funding in order to answer part 2. So in part 2, because it's an electronic system now, you have to write NA. You have to populate something within those fields. And it will yell at you and tell you if you try to skip it. So if you say, yes, I have more than $200,000 in HUD funding, it's requiring you to put something into part 2 and 3. And so an example is, for CARES, we have to put NA in both, because we don't fit the criteria to answer parts 2 or 3. And it's okay for you to put NA. If you do something wrong in this area, it will yell at you. If it doesn't yell at you and you end up doing something wrong, this is a curable technical deficiency, which means before you get your contract, HUD will come back to you and ask you, well, you wrote this, but it doesn't make much sense. So they'll come back to you. So I don't want folks really stressing too hard about this, but I do want you to try to answer it accurately. The other form that we used to have to sign and scan is the drug-free workplace. So the drug-free workplace form is now within each of your projects, which is nice, right? Because in the past, you could have had multiple projects that were at multiple sites. And so this kind of clarifies each project. And again, really, you're just certifying, and then you're putting the address of the site, the service site, which is what you did on paper. There's a new lobbying form for you to read through. It, again, is a check box and then a certification. Again, notice everything is being dated electronically. So it's not going to be wrong. It's going to meet HUD's requirement. And then there's still that old lobbying form, the SFLLL. And again, it's mostly check marks and check boxes, and then a certification. So that does make life a lot easier, but you are filling that out, all of that paperwork, per project application. So just because you do it once, if you have 5 projects, you're actually doing it per project 5 times. Once you finish all of that, that's when the rest of your application will open. Before it fully does, so the left-hand side in the next page shows it, this is a new screen. So this is the screen that's letting you know that everything is in read only until you tell eSNAPS if you are submitting without changes or if you need to make changes. So you do need to click through everything and verify, but you're not touching it. And even if you tried to touch it, it won't let you change anything. You would just be clicking with nothing happening. Until you say you want to submit with changes, you tell eSNAPS exactly which screens to open. And again, then only those screens will open for you to be able to edit. There are a few screens that are new and that are automatically opened. So the Dedicated Plus information, that screen is 3C. So you have to choose it. And you'll see here, it's letting me choose NA, Dedicated Plus, 100% dedicated. If you want to be Dedicated Plus, but then dedicate beds, you have to open up B4. B4 is where you note how many of your total beds are dedicated chronic. 6D is automatically open because it's asking you about if your project generates program income. And it's very specific in the definition of program income. I'm sorry, let me go back. It's also noting in the blue that if you are using a third party for your in-kind match, that you have to get a MOU. And there's a new screen for you to attach that MOU. So if you do not have in-kind services, if it is a cash match, you don't need to worry about that. If it is in-kind, this is something that HUD is looking at. So I would start working on your MOUs if you don't already have one. Okay, so if I said that my program does have program income, I have to describe what that source is, and I have to estimate an amount. So what is program income? And this is pulled straight from the regs, right? So It could be rent and occupancy charges. So think about if you want to, think about if your program actually gets that, and you have to then estimate it. Okay, your summary budget, remember I told you that it kind of changed from before? It looks smaller now, which is great. So that's the example of the summary budget. And again, if you need to make changes, so if you had a budget amendment, you wouldn't make it in the summary budget, you would make it underneath each of the eligible areas, which have their own screens. At the end of all this is a screen that pops up, submission without changes. So the very first thing it asks, because even if you are reallocating, so if you're making your budget smaller, they want to know that, right? So they're asking, are you requesting less money because of reallocation? And then, do you wish to submit the application without making changes, right? So I have two examples. One, I said, yes, I'm submitting without changes, and literally all I have to do is save and next. But if I want to make changes, this screen pops up where I have to identify the open screens. So notice there are already some check marks that are there because those are the screens that are automatically open because you have to answer something on there. There's something new. You also notice that there's this box here. Oops. There's this box here. In order to describe what you're changing on those screens. And again, HUD is very specific in that it will help the process immensely if you just bullet what you changed very succinctly and clearly. Okay. Then, of course, is your submission summary page. And just, again, folks get frustrated because sometimes they'll scroll to the bottom and their submit button is grayed out. The only reason it would be grayed out is if you don't have all green check marks going down your complete screen. Now you can have these little dashes because there's no input. If you have a big red X, you have to fix that first. Otherwise, you can't submit. The other clarification, when you hit submit, it only goes to your collaborative applicant. So it's only coming to us first. So don't be afraid when we ask you to submit by August 18th, on or before, if you still have questions or if you need more technical assistance, because we are able to send it back to you. You are not submitting it to HUD. Your collaborative applicant submits it to HUD as a package. So we have to put all of the applications for each COC in ranked order, and then we hit submit. HUD won't even let us hit submit unless every project is ranked. So until we actually rank and hit the submit button, we're able to kind of bounce it back to you for edits. However, this year, I don't know how many edits we're going to have because of this submit without changes. Because when you do submit it to us, even if you have changes, you're noting what you changed. So we are going to do that review before a HUD rep does it to make life a lot easier. Okay, so I want to pause because we're almost at the end. Are there any questions? So please remember to take yourself off mute. Okay, no questions? All right. Oops. Okay, so some important note for dates. The COC and project applications were available starting July 19th. Now, it did take them a little while to put out the detailed instructions, so really folks only got it started on this process last week. So if you haven't looked at the detailed instructions, there's a link to them at the end of this webinar. All project applications must be submitted via eSnaps by August 18th. That includes any reallocation or new projects coming in for the bonus. So if you are interested in submitting an application, please let CARE staff know immediately. All COC applications must be submitted by September 28th at 8 p.m. And I should caveat that with, that's to HUD. That means that the narrative piece, the big piece that CARES writes with the community, as well as every single project application, has to be given to HUD on or before September 28th at 8 p.m. Now, our goal is to get it in the week before, because we do not want to take a risk of any technical issues happening within eSnaps and then not being able to hit submit. So the August 18th deadline we give you backs into the dates that HUD is requiring that communities follow. Each COC has their own timelines, both for rank and review, for new project application submittals, as well as for approvals. So please feel free. To contact Jen if you don't have one already. All of them should be updated, and I believe they're on the website. So there was a question about the process for opening discussion on the consolidated application or the consolidated program.
So my question, yeah, sorry, hi.
No.
So my question is, when you're sort of opening up the application for something that is newly consolidated, is there it's making sure that you're using the surviving grants and...
Yes. So there are two things that HUD says, right? Your best bet actually for consolidating may be just to create a renewal project and not import any data. Because if you import data, you're changing everything anyway. For some folks who have small consolidations, that's okay, but that's a great question. We have a lot of consolidations happening throughout almost all of our continuums. If you are consolidating more than one program, please give us a call, because I do not suggest that you import data from any application from last year. You could open up a renewal application that is blank, and you need to make sure that you're using the surviving grant, and you have to mush all of the demographic information, all of the budget information that has been approved by HUD. So any of the consolidated applications we get, guaranteed CARE staff is going to be calling you to just verbally go over it. So thank you. That's a really good point that I didn't bring up. All right, so I know this was all a lot, and it was very quick that we went over it. HUD put out a lot of information, and almost all at one time, in order to complete the NOFA. So the very first link here is the NOFA itself, which is about 70 pages. The next link really explains the new joint project. The next details the Dedicated Plus projects. The third gives you a step-by-step guide in how to complete your applicant profile if you're struggling. The next is how to complete the 2880 specifically, because, and I'm glad they put this out, because you're completing it in two separate areas, HUD kind of walks you through how to do that. And then the last, which is I think the most important for this piece, is the step-by-step guide, the detailed instructions for the renewal projects. Now, there is also an eSnap step-by-step where it shows you the screenshots too, but I really feel that the detailed instructions are just a better guide. If you've gone through eSnaps before, all you really need is a quick refresher. You don't need the detailed step-by-step. You just kind of need someone to walk through it once. But this is important because the detailed instructions give you guidance on how to answer questions if something isn't clear for your particular project. So I would definitely download that, print it, have it with you while you're completing your application. Are there any other questions? Any other questions from in here? All right. Well, I hope this was helpful. And again, if you need any assistance, CARE staff is here to help. Feel free to call any of the COC planning staff. And if we don't know the answer, we will definitely research and investigate in order to find it. So thank you for your time, and I hope everyone has a great day. Okay.
I have a quick question.
Hold on one second.